Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling small, exhausted, or strangely guilty, and you couldn't quite explain why? It wasn't a fight. No one raised their voice. But something in you felt off. Like you were just drained of your energy, your confidence, maybe even your dignity. And the worst part? You couldn't tell if it was your fault. That's the power of a toxic person. They don't show up in obvious ways. They don't wear warning signs. They don't scream or push you around in front of a crowd. They smile. They flatter. They pretend to care. Until you start to feel like your emotions don't matter, your time isn't yours, and your voice is a little too loud for their comfort. You try to be kind. You try to keep the peace. You tell yourself you're just being the bigger person. But deep down, you know something's wrong. Deep down, you feel the invisible chains tightening around your spirit. And every time you stay silent just to avoid conflict, those chains get stronger. This isn't about one bad person. It's about a pattern. A cycle you've been stuck in without even realizing it. It's emotional manipulation disguised as love, loyalty, or even friendship. And if you've ever felt like you're always the one giving more, always the one apologizing, always the one trying to fix what you didn't break, then you've already met this kind of person. You've already paid the price. But here's the truth no one tells you. Toxic people don't leave on their own. They don't suddenly wake up and respect your boundaries. They stay as long as you allow them access. They stay because they've learned how to make you doubt yourself just enough to stay quiet. They've learned how to twist your kindness into weakness. They've learned how to make you question your own reality. That's the trap. And it doesn't matter how strong you are, how smart you are, or how much you error in message stream try to keep the peace. They'll keep taking, not because they're strong, but because you haven't shown them where the door is. Every time you avoid the discomfort of speaking up, you make room for them to stay. Every time you swallow your truth to avoid their reaction, you teach them they're allowed to cross your line. And over time, that silence turns into self-betrayal. You begin to question your own instincts. You wonder if maybe you're too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. But you're not too much. You're just surrounded by people who've convinced you that less of you is easier to control. It's not your job to carry their insecurities. It's not your responsibility to shrink so others can feel tall. But if you don't wake up to the cost of this pattern, it will keep bleeding into every area of your life. Your relationships, your energy, your future. Because while you're busy trying to avoid offending someone else, you're silently abandoning yourself. And that's the most dangerous loss of all. Here's what no one tells you. Every quiet compromise with a toxic person comes with a price. You pay with your time, your confidence, your boundaries. You pay in overthinking and emotional exhaustion. You pay in nights where your mind races with everything you should have said, everything you wanted to do but didn't. Just to keep the peace. That's not peace, that's survival. And there's a difference between being peaceful and being afraid to speak. One is rooted in strength. The other is built on fear. Fear of being judged. Fear of being abandoned. Fear of not being enough. But ask yourself, how long are you going to keep paying that price? How many more times will you silence your truth to keep people who don't even deserve access to your life? You can't heal in the same space that keeps wounding you. You can't grow while you're constantly on edge, afraid of how someone will react when you finally draw a line. Growth requires discomfort, but not the kind that eats you alive. The kind that calls you to rise. The most powerful shift begins the moment you recognize that your peace is worth protecting, even if it makes other people uncomfortable. That your voice matters, even if it shakes. That your worth isn't tied to how much you tolerate, but to how boldly you say, "This is not okay." And that shift? It starts with one decision. One moment where you choose to no longer be available for disrespect. One moment where you say no and don't explain yourself. One moment where you stop justifying your boundaries and start honoring them. That's the turning point. Not loud, not dramatic, just clear. Because toxic people aren't addicted to chaos. They're addicted to access. They feed off your hesitation, your confusion, your need to be liked. And the second you stop giving them what they're looking for, they either fall away or finally reveal who they really are. Either way, it's a win. You don't need to be louder. You don't need to fight harder. You need to stop apologizing for protecting your energy. You need to stop asking for permission to value yourself. This is your life. And you weren't born to be anyone's emotional dumping ground. You weren't meant to spend your days doubting your worth because someone else is uncomfortable with your strength. You are meant to stand tall, speak clearly, and walk away from anything that makes you forget your value. So take a breath. Feel that truth settle in your bones. You don't owe anyone access to your peace. You don't need to explain why you're finally choosing yourself. You just need to do it. Not tomorrow. Not when they change. Not when it's easier. Now. Because the only way they stop is when you stop letting them in. One choice, one boundary, one unshakable moment of self-respect. That's all it takes to change everything. And once you do it, once you make that choice, not with anger but with clarity, they'll never bother you the same way again. They'll either respect you or they'll remove themselves. And in both cases you win. That one decision to finally choose yourself is not just about saying no. It's about reclaiming everything you gave away without even realizing it. Your time, your peace, your sense of control. For too long you've bent so others wouldn't break. You've dimmed your light so they wouldn't feel small. You've walked on eggshells, softened your voice, and let things slide, just to keep the illusion of harmony. But what's the cost of that illusion? What do you lose every time you say yes when your soul is screaming no? What happens to your spirit when you keep swallowing pain just to keep others comfortable? The truth is, nothing changes until you do. And change starts the moment you stop explaining your boundaries and start enforcing them. The moment you realize that your silence isn't kindness, it's self-erasure. Toxic people aren't confused, they're calculating. They know exactly how far they can push you. And as long as you keep absorbing the blame, they'll keep handing it to you. But there is something they fear more than your confrontation. They fear your clarity. They fear the version of you who no longer explains, no longer argues, no longer justifies. The version who simply says, "That's enough," and means it. You don't have to shout, you don't have to fight, you just have to stop participating in your own disrespect. Let that sink in. Every time you let someone cross a line without consequence, you teach them how to treat you. And every time you draw that line and stand firm, you teach them what you will no longer tolerate. One act of strength creates a ripple effect, not just in how others treat you, but in how you see yourself. Because when you hold your ground, you send a message to your own mind: I am no longer available for less than I deserve. That's not ego, that's healing. You weren't put here to be a sponge for other people's damage. You weren't born to carry the weight of guilt that doesn't belong to you. You are not responsible for fixing what others refuse to confront in themselves. It's not your job to heal someone who keeps hurting you. It's not your duty to stay in places where your presence is used, not valued. The longer you remain in those spaces, the harder it becomes to remember who you were before they made you doubt your worth. But there's a moment, one moment, that changes everything. The moment you stop choosing peace at the expense of your soul. That's where your power begins. Because when you stop chasing approval, you start attracting respect. When you stop explaining yourself, you start commanding space. And when you finally draw the line, not from anger, but from self-love, you begin to walk in a kind of freedom that toxic people can't survive in. This is what they don't want you to know. The second you become unavailable for manipulation, they lose interest. The second you become emotionally unreactive to their games, they lose control. They only stay where they can feed off your confusion. But clarity? That starves them. So choose clarity. Say what you mean. Stand by what you say. Don't let guilt become the chain that keeps you tied to people who never had your best interest in mind. And yes, it might feel uncomfortable at first. You'll second-guess yourself. You'll feel the weight of silence, the shift in energy, the looks, the whispers. But none of that can compare to the peace of finally being true to yourself. Let them be uncomfortable. Let them wonder what changed. You don't owe anyone an explanation for healing. Because the truth is, you've tolerated too much for too long. You've explained, forgiven, overlooked, and now, it's your turn to reclaim the space you've been giving away. You are not too much. You're not dramatic. You're not cold. You're just finally honoring the boundaries that should have been respected from the beginning. Let that be your new standard. When your peace becomes non-negotiable, everything around you begins to shift. The right people adjust. The wrong people disappear. And you start breathing again. You start walking taller. You start remembering who you are. You don't have to be aggressive. You just have to be clear. Because once you set that line and stick to it, you'll be surprised how fast the noise fades, how quickly the chaos quiets, and how powerful it feels to finally live without the weight of pretending. All it takes is one moment of strength, one act of truth, one decision to stop shrinking and start rising. That's when the healing begins. That's when you stop surviving and start leading your life with power. The moment you stop bending, you start becoming. Because clarity doesn't just drive toxic people away, it calls your true self back. That part of you that always knew what felt right but stayed quiet. That part of you that once trusted your voice but learned to bury it. That part of you that has been waiting, not for someone else to rescue you, but for you to rise. And when you rise, everything changes. Your energy speaks before your words ever do. The way you carry yourself tells the world what you will and will not accept. And when that shift happens, toxic people notice. They feel it. The old version of you, the one who over-explained, who apologized for existing, who tolerated just to avoid tension, is gone. And in their place stands someone they can't manipulate anymore. They'll test you. They'll push. They'll try to guilt you back into your old patterns. Because toxic people don't lose control easily. They try to pull you back. Not because they love you, but because they loved having power over you. They'll twist your silence into cruelty, your distance into betrayal, your peace into arrogance. But don't fall for it. That's their last attempt to regain access. And the moment you cave, even a little, they know you're still reachable. Still moldable, still afraid. But when you don't flinch, when you hold the line, even with shaking hands, you reclaim something no one else can give you, your power. You don't owe explanations to people who thrived off your silence. You don't need to justify your growth to those who never respected your boundaries. There is a difference between being kind and being available for harm. And what you're doing now, this transformation, is not cruelty. It's self-respect. Self-respect means saying, I will not carry this weight anymore. It means choosing your peace over their chaos, your truth over their comfort. And yes, sometimes it means walking away from people you once cared deeply for. But understand this, if someone needs you to shrink to love you, it was never love. Love doesn't require sacrifice of your self-worth. Respect doesn't come with strings. And the people who truly see you, who value you, won't make you question your sanity just to keep them close. The ones who deserve your presence will never require you to abandon yourself to maintain the connection. That's why setting boundaries is not just a defense, it's a declaration. A declaration that your mental health, your energy, your time, and your heart are no longer up for negotiation. A declaration that from this moment on, you will never again explain to someone why being treated with basic human decency is not optional. And the beauty is, once you take that stand, your life starts to reflect it. The drama fades. The anxiety softens. You begin to notice how much space you were giving to people who only came to take. You begin to see how many of your decisions were shaped by fear. Fear of losing them, fear of being alone, fear of not being enough. But here's the shift. Once you stop fearing those things, you stop tolerating the behavior that keeps them alive. You are not alone. You are not weak. You are not selfish for wanting peace. You are strong enough to break the cycle, brave enough to be misunderstood, and wise enough to know that freedom doesn't come from avoiding discomfort. It comes from walking through it. Every time you choose peace over pleasing, you build a life that reflects your worth. Every time you say no to someone who once controlled you, you say yes to the future version of you, the one who's powerful, grounded, and untouchable by manipulation. That version of you is waiting. And it only takes one act of courage to meet them. One clear decision. One final time where you decide to stop apologizing for having needs, for having boundaries, for having a voice. That's how everything starts to shift, not with noise, not with revenge, but with quiet, unshakable certainty that you will never again betray yourself for the sake of keeping someone else comfortable. The moment you decide that, the game ends. The power they once had disappears. And all that remains is your truth, loud, solid, and finally free. Freedom begins the moment you stop making your worth negotiable, not in words, but in actions. In the choices you make every day. In the standards you set without hesitation. In the silence you give to those who only knew how to manipulate your voice. Because when you truly know your value, you don't fight for attention. You filter it. You don't beg for respect, you expect it. You don't chase anyone to treat you right, you walk away the first time they don't. That's not cold, that's clarity. And clarity is the most powerful energy you can carry. You were never meant to exist in survival mode, constantly scanning every conversation for hidden meaning, adjusting your tone to avoid conflict, giving second, third, 10th chances to people who never earned your trust in the first place. That's not love, that's fear disguised as loyalty. And the longer you stay in that cycle, the more it erodes you. Slowly, quietly. Until one day, you can't recognize your own reflection. Until you're living a life that belongs more to other people's comfort than your own truth. That's the danger of tolerating too much. You begin to forget that you have the power to stop it. But you do. And the moment you stop tolerating disrespect, you start attracting peace. Not because the world suddenly changes, but because you finally do. You stop answering calls that drain you. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop showing up for battles that were never yours to fight. Instead, you protect your energy like it's sacred, because it is. Not everyone deserves access to you. Not everyone should sit at your table. And that doesn't make you unkind. It makes you self-aware. The more you heal, the more you realize that peace is not something you find, it's something you choose. And that choice starts with what you no longer accept. It starts with understanding that not everyone who loses you is losing something good. Sometimes, the greatest gift you give to yourself is the absence of those who only knew how to take. And if your absence disturbs their peace, it means your presence was enabling their dysfunction. Let that truth settle. You're not here to keep people comfortable while you crumble. You're not responsible for softening the truth so others can avoid growth. Growth is painful, but so is staying stuck. And you're not here to repeat the same emotional wounds until they become your identity. You're here to rise, to evolve, to create a life that reflects the strength you've built in silence. Because true confidence isn't loud, it's calm. It's the way you stop reacting to every jab. The way you hold your boundaries without turning them into battles. The way you walk away, not because you're weak, but because you finally know what's worth your energy. Let go of the need to prove your side. Let go of the idea that closure comes from their understanding. Closure is a decision, not a dialogue. It's the moment you stop explaining why you deserve better and start living like you already have it. You've given enough chances. You've explained yourself enough times. You've waited long enough for someone to wake up and treat you right. But here's the truth. They won't. Because toxic people don't change when you keep making room for their behavior. They change, if they ever do, when you take that room away. So take it back. Take back your power, your peace, your sense of self. Reclaim the space in your heart that was cluttered with apologies you never owed. Reclaim your time from conversations that went in circles. Reclaim your worth from people who could only see your use, not your value. You are not here to be easy to swallow. You are here to be whole. And that wholeness starts with boundaries that don't bend, with standards that don't sink just to avoid being alone. You are not alone. You are aligned with your truth, your purpose, your path. And when you're aligned, nothing can shake you. Not the guilt, not the silence, not the fear of walking away, because you'll know, deep in your bones, that choosing yourself was never selfish. It was necessary. Necessary to stop the cycle. Necessary to feel peace. Necessary to live a life that reflects the strength you've earned. Let that be your turning point. Not tomorrow, not someday, now. Because the more you hold space for your peace, the less room chaos has to exist. And eventually, those toxic voices won't even echo in your world. They'll fade. Not because they've changed, but because they no longer have a place to stand. That's the power of choosing you. Quiet, firm, final, and completely free. You don't have to fight to be free. You just have to stop surrendering. The more you pull your energy away from what drains you, the more powerful you become. Because the truth is, toxic people can only thrive where there's permission. And that permission is often disguised as kindness, forgiveness, or patience. But when kindness costs you your peace, it's no longer kindness, it's self-abandonment. This is where your transformation becomes unshakable, when you no longer feel the urge to convince someone of your worth. When you stop explaining your boundaries like they need approval. When you realize that peace isn't something they can give or take away. It's something you protect, fiercely and unapologetically. You start to move differently. You speak less but mean more. You cut ties without the internal chaos. You don't entertain drama, not because you're scared of conflict, but because you've outgrown the noise. Growth isn't loud. It's the quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly who they are, what they deserve, and what they will never tolerate again. And it's not just about cutting people off. It's about no longer being available for behavior that chips away at your spirit. You're no longer accessible to guilt trips. You're no longer the emotional crutch for people who refuse to stand on their own. You no longer water relationships that never tried to grow with you. This is the level where you no longer chase closure. You create it. You no longer wait for apologies. You rise above the need for them. Because your healing doesn't depend on their recognition. It depends on your decision. The decision to no longer carry pain that isn't yours. The decision to walk away from patterns that kept you small. And yes, it will confuse them. People are not used to the version of you who doesn't flinch, who doesn't respond, or who doesn't fold under pressure. But that's not your concern. You're not here to be understood by the ones who benefited from your silence. You're here to live in alignment, to breathe without tension, to feel light in your own presence. You've already tried the other way. You tried holding on, being patient, giving more than you had. You tried explaining, softening, forgiving what was never corrected. And it left you exhausted, didn't it? Mentally drained, emotionally tangled, spiritually disconnected. That wasn't love. That was survival. But survival is no longer your standard. Thriving is. Thriving in your truth. Thriving in your clarity. Thriving in your refusal to keep playing small so others can stay comfortable. And when you operate from that space, when your energy is no longer diluted by dysfunction, you become magnetic. You attract peace. You attract authenticity. You attract the kind of people who see you without needing to control you. Because people who love your boundaries are the ones who truly love you. Not the version they can manipulate. Not the version that gives endlessly. But the real, whole you. The one who knows what it took to get here. The one who carries scars, not shame. Lessons, not guilt. Strength, not silence. And don't mistake being alone for being lonely. Solitude is where your power sharpens. Where you remember your voice. Where you realign with your own needs. You've been distracted by noise for too long. Pulled in every direction except the one that leads you back to yourself. Now it's different. Now you're no longer operating from fear, you're moving from truth. And truth is firm. It doesn't need approval. It doesn't shift to make others feel okay. It just is. And when you stand in your truth, toxic people lose access. Not because they were removed, but because they no longer fit. That's the secret they don't tell you. You don't need to fight back. You just need to rise above. Because the moment you elevate your energy, the ones who only knew how to drain it naturally fall away. They can't reach you where you're going. They can't manipulate what no longer reacts. They can't survive in an environment that's built on clarity and self-respect. So let them wonder. Let them talk. Let them play the victim. You've got no space left for that narrative. Your story has shifted. You've entered the chapter where your peace is protected, your boundaries are respected, and your energy is sacred. This isn't about revenge. This is about rebirth. You owe it to yourself to stop shrinking, to stop waiting, to stop asking for permission to be powerful. You owe it to yourself to build a life that reflects your healing, not your trauma, a life that feels calm, steady, true. That life starts the moment you choose it, and you've already begun. Real freedom begins when you no longer ask, what will they think, and start asking, what do I need? That shift, subtle but life-changing, is the mark of someone who has stepped out of the shadows and reclaimed their power. Because you finally realize that your peace matters more than their opinions. Your healing matters more than their comfort. And your life, it was never meant to be shaped by the expectations of people who never truly saw you. This is the awakening, the realization that being liked by everyone is a cage, a heavy one. It makes you shrink yourself, hide your truth, and trade authenticity for approval. But approval is addictive. And the more you chase it, the further you drift from who you really are. You end up living someone else's version of your life, losing your voice to keep the peace in rooms where your presence was never truly valued. You weren't born to be tolerated. You were born to be respected, fully, deeply, without conditions. So when you begin to honor your own boundaries, you won't just disappoint people, you'll disrupt the entire pattern they've built around you. They'll call you difficult, selfish, cold. But that's not truth. That's manipulation disguised as feedback. Because the moment you stop being easy to use, people start labeling you hard to love. Let them. Let them call you names. Let them misunderstand your silence. Let them mislabel your strength. Because what they think no longer defines you. It never did. You've just been carrying the weight of their projections for too long. And now, you're done. You're no longer available for emotional games. No longer bending to maintain relationships that cost your peace. No longer seeking validation from the very people who couldn't see your worth when you gave them your best. That version of you, the one who over-explained, over-apologized, over-gave, is gone. Not because you stopped caring, but because you started healing. Healing has made you wiser. It's shown you the red flags you used to call potential. It's helped you see that not every conflict needs your energy. Not every argument needs your voice. And not every person deserves a seat at your table. Especially the ones who only showed up to eat and never once asked how you were really doing. You've realized now that peace isn't just a feeling, it's a boundary, it's a decision. It's what you choose every time you say no to chaos, no to guilt, no to the habits that once kept you small. Because you're not chasing peace anymore, you're embodying it. And when you live in that kind of peace, toxic people lose their power. Their manipulation doesn't reach you. Their tactics no longer pull a reaction. Their absence stops feeling like a loss and starts feeling like relief. That's how you know you're rising. When silence becomes your answer. When walking away becomes your strength. When your energy is no longer spent proving a point but building a life. You're not bitter, you're better, you're not angry, you're aligned. And there's a difference. You've learned to respond, not react. To observe, not absorb. To pause, breathe, and choose what aligns with your highest self, not what pleases the loudest voice. This is the life you're meant to live. One where your worth isn't debated, where your presence isn't drained, where your boundaries are not a question, they're a statement. And that statement is clear: I will not abandon myself for anyone ever again. So breathe deeper. Stand taller, walk lighter. You've shed the weight of needing to be understood by people who were never willing to understand themselves. You've stopped carrying the burden of trying to fix what wasn't yours to fix. You've finally come home, to yourself. And now that you're here, don't ever leave again. Don't ever dim again. Don't ever settle again. Because the day you decided to put yourself first was the day you stopped being a victim of other people's behavior and started being the author of your own peace. That is your power. Quiet, steady, unshakable. Let them wonder how you healed. Let them ask why you stopped answering. Let them miss the version of you who stayed too long, gave too much, and asked for so little. That version no longer exists. And in its place stands someone unbreakable. Because they've been broken before and chose to rebuild with fire, not fear. Now, you are no longer available for the energy that used to control you. You've graduated from chaos. And in its place, you've built a sanctuary. One choice. One shift. One boundary at a time. And now, nothing toxic can touch you. You didn't come this far to play small again. You didn't endure the storm just to hand your peace back to people who never earned it. The old version of you may have tolerated the noise, the drama, the manipulation, but that version paid a price you're no longer willing to pay. Because now, you see clearly. You see how your silence was mistaken for permission, how your patience became an invitation, and how your kindness was twisted into weakness. But not anymore. Now you understand that boundaries aren't walls, they're doors. Doors that lead to freedom. Doors that separate peace from chaos, growth from toxicity, purpose from distraction. And you hold the key. You decide who gets in. You decide who stays. You decide what energy surrounds your life. That's your power. That's your responsibility. No more waiting for them to change. No more hoping they'll see your value. You've stopped outsourcing your worth to people who couldn't carry it. It's not selfish to choose yourself. It's survival. It's healing. It's the quiet rebellion of someone who refuses to keep bleeding for relationships that never tried to stop the cut. When you stop betraying yourself to keep others comfortable, you begin to see the world through a different lens. You stop confusing familiarity with love. You stop mistaking chaos for passion. You start demanding peace, not as a luxury, but as a necessity. And that's the moment your standards rise. That's the moment your energy shifts. You no longer crave attention, you crave alignment. You no longer chase validation, you seek truth. You no longer fear being alone, you honor solitude as sacred, because now being misunderstood doesn't shake you. Being disliked doesn't define you. You've finally become more loyal to your peace than to their opinions. You stop explaining your decisions to people who never asked about your pain. You stop apologizing for the space you take up. You stop asking for permission to live fully, boldly, and freely. That's when toxic people begin to fall away, not because you fought them, but because they can't breathe in the light you now live in. They can't control what doesn't respond. They can't manipulate what doesn't bend. And they can't guilt someone who no longer feels responsible for their chaos. Because now, you've become emotionally untouchable. Not hardened, not numb, just clear. Clear on who you are, clear on what you deserve, clear on what you will never accept again. That kind of clarity is rare. And it's powerful. It makes you unstoppable. Not because you fight harder, but because you walk away faster. Because you trust yourself more. Because you've built an inner world so strong that no outside voice can break it. You've learned to protect your energy like it's sacred, because it is. Your energy is your life force. Your time is your currency. Your peace is your greatest wealth. And not everyone deserves access to that. Especially not those who took advantage of your compassion. Especially not those who turned your softness into their playground. Those days are gone. Those doors are closed. And the version of you who kept reopening them no longer exists. Now, you walk with intention. You speak with purpose. You move in silence not to hide, but to protect. You no longer chase, because you know what flows will never force. You no longer explain, because you know real connection requires no convincing. And you no longer beg, because what's meant for you will never require you to shrink. This is the life that opens up when you stop watering dead plants. When you stop trying to revive relationships that suffocate your growth. When you finally admit that some people were never meant to stay, not because they're evil, but because your evolution demands higher vibrations. Not everyone can come with you. Not everyone should. Let them fall away. Let the distance create peace. Let the silence speak what words never could. The more you rise, the more you'll attract what aligns. You'll start seeing the difference between love and attachment, between loyalty and obligation, between presence and investment. And you'll start choosing better, not because you're bitter, but because you've grown. Growth demands separation. Growth requires discomfort. Growth forces you to confront the patterns that kept you stuck, and the people who benefited from your stagnation. But now you're awake. Now you know. Now you've seen what life feels like when your energy is protected, your space is respected, and your heart is honored. You'll never go back. Because going back would mean betraying the very healing you fought so hard for. And nothing is worth that. Not a friendship, not a relationship, not even family. Nothing is worth trading your inner peace. Because that peace is what keeps you grounded. That peace is what keeps you powerful. That peace is what makes you untouchable. You don't need revenge. You don't need to explain. You just need to keep rising. That's how you win. Quietly, strongly, fully. By never letting them back in.